Former journalist, independent candidate for Goldstein, Zoe Daniel. How you doing, Zoe?
Good.
That's good. I'm really excited to talk to you about this incredible campaign happening here in Goldstein. It's also part of a broader movement of independent campaigns across the country, which is really exciting to see in Australian politics.
Looking forward to the drive in the cool car.
Have you driven one of these
I
before?
have not.
Oh, okay. Have you driven any electric car?
I have not.
Oh, sorry, you keep going. Harder.
Oh yeah, it's fast. It's got a little bit of rocket ship vibe.
I think it's great to see so many independent candidates putting integrity kind of front and centre.
I think people want accountability from their leaders. They want to be able to trust that their money's being spent in the right places. They want transparency. I think people have become very frustrated with things like pork barrelling to win elections, and also the avoidance of hard decision making, the sense that you can't tackle hard issues because that's not going to be popular. So therefore we just don't deal with the hard stuff. I think the penny's dropped for people around why particular policies are like they are. We need to have transparency around who's pulling the strings in the background, who's holding the power, who are the lobbyists, who are they meeting with, what money's changing hands in what context. That really needs to be opened up.
Who is pulling the strings and who is governing policy has a direct influence over Australia's ability to respond to the climate crisis. Corruption is important at the best of times, but it's super important in the context of the climate crisis.
Why is our policy the way it is? Why have we not been able to progress this? If you look all the way back to Kyoto, you can see the powerful interests that have been at play in the back rooms of Australian politics that have been influencing the way our politicians think and make decisions on these issues. Unfortunately, that means that we've wasted a lot of time due to vested interests. I'm not going to be beholden to party politics. I don't have to vote on party lines. I can analyse legislation and policy on its merits, and every decision or vote is a conscience vote, rather than being sort of boxed by a party position that may well be being dictated by someone or a powerful influence in the background.
Tim Wilson is trying to pump up his climate credentials along with a lot of the other moderate liberal incumbents, but really Tim Wilson can stand in front of as many solar panels and electric vehicle chargers as he likes, but he still has the same voting record on climate as someone like Barnaby Joyce.
Look, I think the government's record on its lack of climate action is pretty clear and present to people who care about this issue, and you can't repair that in the few weeks before an election. So I think on that front I offer a very alternative position, and people therefore get to make their decision on which position they prefer. Part of the point of running as a community-backed independent is to pose the idea to people that there is an alternative, that they don't have to keep just voting the same old way for the same old party to get the same old party politics and the same old just voting the way that the party votes, or in this case the way that the National Party votes. I think one thing that's become evident to a lot of people in Goldstein is that we actually already have a hung parliament, and the balance of power is held by the National Party, and the National Party is therefore dictating policy for an electorate like Goldstein, and their positions are not representative of the priorities of the people of Goldstein. So if we want to have a voice in the parliament, we need to not be a safe coalition seat and actually assert ourselves so that we actually get to speak up and speak our mind and be taken notice of, rather than being taken for granted.
I've actually never considered that before, but you're right. We are essentially in a minority government. It's just that the Liberals and Nationals obviously formed this coalition, but no single party has a majority vote in Australia.
No, and I mean, you said it, the moderate Liberal Party members around the country vote with Barnaby Joyce every time. That's not representative of the electorate of Goldstein.
Climate change is obviously a pretty depressing thing to talk about, especially for those who are kind of trying to communicate it every day and kind of immersed in it every day. It can be quite overwhelming. But there's also some really positive things to talk about if we decide to really roll our sleeves up and take it seriously and transition us to clean technology. And one of the big things that gets me really excited is around the transition to electric vehicles. We have millions of petrol and diesel cars in our cities which are producing petrol and diesel exhaust fumes. Every single one of us is breathing in this stuff every day, and we've been breathing in a bit of it every day of our lives, essentially. So there's not a human alive on the planet now who lives in a city who hasn't been breathing in diesel particulate and carbon monoxide their whole lives. The really amazing thing is that once we transition to 100% electric vehicles, we're going to have pure clean air in our cities for the first time, well, really in over 100 years. What is that going to be like? There's no one alive who's experienced that.
It's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
As you said, I mean, there is so much that's exciting in this reframe. If we can only do the reframe, why do we keep looking backwards, going, oh, we've got to hold on to that with our fingernails until they're bleeding, rather than going, well, that's drifting away from us already. So let's just actually jump to the next thing, which is actually going to be a lot more positive for our society in many ways. I really love the Saul Griffith concept. The whole electrify everything idea really resonates with me. We have these vast rooftops to put solar on, that we have wind, that we have hydro, that we have open space, that we have smart people. In Australia, we have all the things we need to be the world leader in this, unlike any other country. So why would we keep waiting? It makes no sense. And now we can't keep waiting.
We've talked about the health benefits, the economic benefits, but also with this decentralized, like community-owned and operated grid, it also becomes a more resilient way of delivering power around, because at the moment we've got big coal-fired power stations, we've got a highly centralized system. If major power lines get cut during storms or floods or fires, it can throw out thousands and thousands of houses that are dependent on it. Whereas I think what we're going to see with a decentralized model is that our system becomes much more resilient with increasing natural disasters.
As that battery technology improves too and becomes cheaper, people are going to become more confident in those community energy projects. There's a great case for getting those pilots up and testing and creating almost template systems so that communities can then take an off-the-shelf concept and implement it. I've been having some talks in Goldstein about what we might be able to do in some of our commercial shopping villages, and I think very quickly we'll get to a point where there'll be enough piloting of this, there'll be enough testing and set up in different urban and rural environments where communities will be able to go, okay, yep, we want that kind of system, and they can just then pull the concept off the shelf. Someone manages it and implements it. There's huge bushfire risk in the existing system, as we've seen at Black Saturday and other times in relatively recent history. It also means that recovering from a disaster would potentially look quite different if you're not reliant on that sort of broader power line infrastructure in smaller rural communities. Does that mean communities can get back online faster after there's been a disaster? Because knocking out electricity and communication in a disaster, as I've seen in lots of places where I've covered disasters, is a huge part of the problem for communities that are recovering from something that's had a huge impact on them, and they really want to move forward and get back on their feet, but they can't do that with no power and no comms.
You go home, you plug it into your garage, and your car will trade electricity with the grid. If you're getting these situations where you're getting this abundance of energy and it's dropping the price down, even sometimes to negative, that it would be theoretically possible that you could get paid to take electricity into your battery at a certain time and then paid to sell it back out at another time. And that could all be happening automatically.
Potentially drastic shift of wealth back to community. We always tend to focus on, what's it going to cost? You're going to have to make these changes. There's going to be transition costs. So that becomes a barrier. until you actually consider, well, what's it going to save over time? Individuals, householders, small businesses stand to save thousands of dollars a year. I mean, I lived in central Bangkok, right in the centre of the Bangkok CBD for 4 years. It's not a healthy environment. Our 2 children were there. They were very small at the time. We definitely had respiratory illnesses during the time that we were there. Without that carbon monoxide, that's a totally different city.
Absolutely. To just stop and imagine what a city like Bangkok or Mumbai or even, I mean, Sydney or Melbourne, to be honest, like it's going to completely transform our city and almost become numb to it. We don't notice the pollution and we don't notice the noise pollution. Imagine a fish that has lived in a polluted pond its entire life and it doesn't know any different, and it's kind of miserable constantly. The fish just thinks this is how life is, this is how life must be, and then you take that fish out of the polluted pond and you put it into a clean pond, and all of a sudden the fish is going, oh my god, I feel amazing, this is incredible. And I think that's what we're going to feel like when our cities are pollution free as well.
Yeah, it's a lovely metaphor. The other one, of course, is that we're the frogs in the pot full of boiling water, and we've been in it for so long that we've lost the brain trigger to actually jump out and do something about it. Yep. So maybe those two metaphors could sit together in some way.
SpaceX, they've got this project called Starlink, which you've probably heard of.
Yep.
When it's finished, it'll be like 40,000 of these small low orbit satellites. They've got about 2,000 up there now. During the Tongan volcano eruption, they had their comms cut. They couldn't access internet, and SpaceX sent a bunch of these terminals to Tonga. All you need is the terminal, and if you've got a clear line of vision to the sky, you can get high-speed internet. So they were able to re-establish a connection with the outside world through this technology.
Yeah, and it's a huge deal. There was a superstorm that I covered in the Philippines in 2013. It's probably the most traumatic thing that I've ever witnessed. One of the biggest issues was that when this massive typhoon crossed over this peninsula, it in effect flattened a city of 200,000 people. In doing that, it knocked out all electricity, communications and running water. The recovery from something like that is massive in a structural sense, but one of the most stressful aspects of that for the people affected is not being able to contact each other. You don't know if the rest of your family is alive. You can't call people to say you're alive. There's no way of checking in on each other. It really magnifies the trauma for people, and it also really slows down the recovery effort for agencies who are there trying to deliver help. So communication in a situation like that is huge, and what Elon Musk is doing with the satellite technology is a game changer in terms of disaster management, I think. And even if you were to consider the floods in northern New South Wales and Queensland, internet was off. People find it really difficult to help each other, even in a community support situation when they can't contact each other. So it really is critically important.
Another example also in the Ukraine, where SpaceX was able to get thousands of these terminals in and provide access for people who'd had their internet cut during the invasion. So there's a disaster management aspect, and then what's also going to be fascinating is the way I see it. It's part of this broader decentralization of everything thing that's happening with technology. It's almost got this unstoppable feel to it. We're seeing a decentralization of the media, seeing a decentralization of energy. Now we're talking about decentralization of communications. What happens when these terminals start going into Russia itself, or into countries like China, where there are these firewalls? The internet is censored in these countries. What happens when citizens can get around that with these decentralized models? That's going to affect politics, really.
Yeah, it's true. It gives more power back into the hands of the people. It takes that community organisation ability to a new level. technology has a lot to answer for in many ways in recent history. Like, we're more connected than ever, but we're more disconnected than ever. But I feel like this piece of it has a lot of potential to actually draw people back together, because it's the smallness of it rather than the bigness of it. Because it's so directed. Just running a community-based campaign, I really get the feeling that maybe it's a post-COVID feeling as well, that people are in the mood for being closer to their smaller community rather than being as global in their outlook as perhaps we've become.
Yeah, the independent campaigns, they are being driven by social media, really. Like, that's the core way that these communities are coming together, through Twitter, through Facebook, Instagram. It's the way these messages are getting shared around through the community. The major parties, you could argue that News Corp really is a big asset for the incumbents. These community groups, they don't have these massive media organisations on their side, but they do have the power of social media.
Yeah, community organising has probably never been easier thanks to the power of Facebook. Facebook certainly has its goods and bads, but it is definitely a good way of reaching people in terms of organising. The beauty of it is that the community has control of it.
Yeah.